My eldest son, a pilot, called me early that morning. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "something strange is happening." I smiled, still holding my cup of coffee. "What is it, Nathan?" He took a deep breath. "Is Clara home?" "Yes, she's upstairs. I just heard the shower." "That's impossible. She just boarded my flight to New York." "Nathan," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "what did you just say?" He spoke again, quieter now. "Mom, I saw her. She handed me her passport herself." "Good morning," she said gently, walking past me, her hair damp from the shower. I forced a smile. "Morning, dear." The smell of her perfume filled the air. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching my life story from. The next morning started like any other. Clara was already in the kitchen when I came down. The smell of coffee filled the air. "Good morning, Mom," she said, smiling as she buttered the toast. Her voice was calm, steady, almost too cheerful. I nodded. "Morning, dear." She poured coffee into my cup. "2 sugars, right?" I smiled faintly. "You remembered." She laughed. "Of course I did." Everything looked normal. The breakfast table, the folded napkins, the soft hum of the kettle. But normal felt wrong. Too clean, too precise. I sat down, pretending to read the newspaper. She moved around the kitchen with ease. Then something made me stop turning the page. She picked up the knife, with her left hand. I watched quietly. Clara was right-handed, always had been. I remembered her signing school papers for Matthew, writing grocery lists, slicing vegetables, all with her right hand. Now she was buttering toast with her left, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Since when do you use that hand?" I asked. She froze for a moment, then smiled quickly. "Oh, I'm just practicing. They say it's good for memory." "Interesting," I replied, my tone light, but my pulse wasn't. She set the plate down and looked straight at me. "You're quiet this morning." "Didn't sleep well," I said softly. "Strange dreams." Her eyes lingered on me longer than usual before she nodded. "You should rest more. You think too much." That afternoon, the phone rang again. It was Nathan. His voice sounded different this time, lower, tense. "Mom, I found something." "What is it?" "Her passport." My stomach tightened. "Whose?" "Clara's. She left it on the plane." For a second, I didn't answer. "She's home, Nathan. I just had breakfast with her." He hesitated. "Then you'd better look again, Mom, because I'm holding her passport right now. It was in the seat pocket." I looked toward the living room. Her handbag was on the chair, open. I walked over and glanced inside. There it was. Clara's passport. Same brown leather cover, same small scratch near the corner. My throat went dry. "Nathan, maybe she has an old one." He didn't reply right away. I could hear the buzz of the terminal behind him, the sound of boarding announcements. Then he spoke again, slowly. "Mom, the photo's recent. It's the same one from her new ID. It's definitely hers." I stood still, staring at the open handbag. The passport inside it felt heavier than it should. 2 identical objects. 2 places at once. I pressed a hand to my chest to steady my breathing. "Nathan," I whispered, "don't mention this to anyone yet." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, what's going on?" "I don't know, but I'll find out." After we hung up, I sat at the table and opened my notebook. The ink bled slightly through the paper as I wrote the date. November 6th, the day reality split in 2. His voice was tighter now. "I double-checked the boarding log. Clara's name is on it. She's on my flight." My eyes drifted toward the stairs. "Nathan, that's not possible. She's here. I can hear her upstairs." The silence that followed felt heavy. Then came the sound of the airport loudspeaker in the background, followed by his whisper. "Mom, I saw her. She's in seat 2A. She's talking to a man in a gray suit." The laundry slipped from my hands. Upstairs, the water stopped running. Then came the sound of a door opening. Footsteps, slow, steady, coming closer. "Nathan, what did you say he looked like?" Mid-50s, wedding ring, expensive watch. She laughed at something he said. I couldn't speak, because at that very moment, Clara's voice came from the top of the stairs. "Mom, who's calling?" she asked. I forced my voice steady. "Just a friend, dear." She walked past me toward the kitchen, her hair still wet, humming softly. That night, I made chicken soup for dinner, the one Clara always said she loved. Stephen came home late, loosened his tie, and smiled at the smell. "Smells amazing, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "Thank you, dear," I answered, keeping my tone even. A few minutes later, Clara joined us, her hair perfectly dry, her blue dress pressed as if she'd just come from a photo shoot. "Sorry I'm late," she said softly, placing her phone on the table. "Long day?" she smiled. "Just errands." For a while, everything felt normal. Matthew talked about school. Stephen told a story about work. I tried to laugh in the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop watching Clara's hands. When she reached for the salt, she used her left hand again. Stephen noticed and chuckled. "Since when are you left-handed?" Clara froze for half a second, then smiled, too easily. "Oh, I've been practicing. Keeps the mind sharp." He laughed, shaking his head. "You and your little habits." But I saw it. The faint tremor in her fingers, the momentary slip in her act. I said nothing, just spooned soup into Matthew's bowl. He whispered, "Grandma, Mom's soup tastes different today." I nodded quietly. Maybe she changed the recipe. When dinner ended, I began clearing the plates. Clara stood, leaned over, and kissed my cheek. It was her usual gesture, one she'd done 100 times before. But tonight, it felt wrong, rehearsed. She thanked me and went upstairs. Stephen yawned, turned on the TV, and soon fell asleep on the couch. I sat alone at the table, staring at the half-empty bowl in front of me. The clock ticked on the wall, slow and steady. Nathan's words echoed again in my head. "She's sitting next to a man in a gray suit." The next morning, I was sweeping the porch when Mrs. Collins, my next-door neighbor, called from across the fence. "Morning, Nora. Your daughter-in-law dropped off that pie dish yesterday. Such a sweet girl." I forced a smile. "Yes, she's very thoughtful." She leaned closer on the fence. "Funny thing, though, she handed me the dish with her left hand. Didn't you tell me she was right-handed?" I froze for just a second, then laughed lightly. "Maybe she was holding something." Mrs. Collins shrugged. "Maybe. Still, she looked a little different. Her hair was parted on the other side. Made me do a double take." I managed another polite smile. "You know how women change things up sometimes." She nodded and walked back toward her garden. But her words stayed with me long after she left. When I went inside, Clara was in the kitchen drying her hands. Her hair was parted the usual way again. "Mrs. Collins says thank you for the dish." She smiled. "Oh, that. I just wanted to return it before she forgot." "Did you talk long?" "Not really," she replied, her tone calm. "Why?" I shook my head. "No reason." She turned back to the sink, humming the same tune as before. Her left hand rested on the counter, steady and firm. But when she reached for the towel, she used her right hand instead. I stood there, silent, studying the movements that didn't belong together. Her gestures had no pattern, like she was switching identities mid-action. "Are you going out today?" "Yes, to the market. Need anything?" "Just flour." "Got it." She smiled, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. I watched from the window as she crossed the street. She carried her wicker basket in her left hand, humming the same tune that had started haunting me. When the door clicked shut behind her, I opened my old notebook again. My handwriting was starting to shake, but the words were clear. Left hand today, right hand yesterday. Hair parted wrong, voice steady. I stared at the page for a long moment. The line of ink trembled where my hand had hesitated. That was the moment I stopped dismissing my instincts. The woman living in my house might not be the same one my son had married. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Clara smiled, cooked, cleaned, laughed at the right moments. Everything looked perfectly normal. But little by little, I started noticing small cracks. One morning, she forgot Matthew's favorite cereal. Another day, she used too much salt in the soup, something she never did. They were tiny mistakes, but Clara wasn't the kind of woman who forgot details. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Everyone slips up sometimes. But then she came home from the market wearing a blue blouse. I could have sworn she left in a white one. "You changed clothes?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She blinked, then smiled. "Oh, I spilled something on it." I nodded, but my fingers gripped the edge of the table. That night after she went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, the refrigerator humming softly in the dark. I took out my notebook and flipped through the pages. Every line felt heavier than the one before. Left hand, hair parted wrong, clothes changed. The pattern was growing clearer, even if I didn't want to admit it. I wrote down the latest entry. Left home in white, returned in blue, voice calm, smile rehearsed. Then I stared at the last word, rehearsed, because that's what her life had started to look like, a performance. The next day, I decided to test something. Before she went to the market, I mentioned casually, "Matthew wants his favorite cereal again, the one you usually buy." She nodded. "Of course." When she returned, I looked inside the grocery bag. The box wasn't there. She smiled faintly. "Oh, I forgot. Next time." But her eyes didn't match her tone. They darted away, as if she already knew what I was looking for. That night, I slipped a small camera into the corner of the living room shelf. If I couldn't trust my memory, I'd trust the truth it could capture. Then I opened my notebook again and wrote the line that would become my anchor. This notebook will be my only proof of what's real. The next afternoon, Matthew came home from school carrying his little drawing notebook. "Grandma, look," he said proudly. "Mom helped me draw this yesterday." I smiled. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." He flipped the page and grinned. "And today, she helped me again. Look." I leaned closer. The first page was neat and smooth, the letters straight and balanced. But the second page leaned the other way, uneven, shaky. 2 different hands, 2 different habits. "Mom said she's practicing writing with her left hand," Matthew said, his voice full of pride. I forced a smile. "That's very clever of her." He nodded, then hesitated. "Grandma, sometimes Mom acts funny." I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" He frowned, his small fingers tracing the paper. "Sometimes she hugs me so tight I can't breathe, and sometimes she doesn't even look at me." His words landed like cold stones in my chest. I kept my voice steady. "Maybe she's just tired, sweetheart." He shrugged, still thoughtful. "She smells different sometimes, too." I blinked. "Different?" "Yeah. Sometimes she smells like vanilla, and sometimes like that strong perfume you don't like." I reached out and brushed his hair gently. "You're very observant, Matthew." He smiled proudly, not realizing what he'd just revealed. When he ran upstairs to wash his hands, I sat back in my chair. The air felt heavier than before. The little details he'd noticed were the same ones I'd been writing down. Smell, gestures, the way she touched things. Children don't overthink. They just tell the truth. I took out my notebook, the one that had started to feel like a diary of madness, and turned to a fresh page. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust. My hand trembled as I wrote. Handwriting different, mood changes without reason. Matthew feels it too. I stopped for a moment, staring at the last sentence. If even a child could sense it, then I wasn't imagining anything. Someone was moving through this house wearing Clara's face, switching details like clothes. The sound of her footsteps echoed from the hallway. "Mom," she called, cheerful as ever. "Do you want tea?" I closed the notebook quietly. "In a minute," I said. When she appeared in the doorway, smiling, I looked at her long enough to memorize that face. 2 days later, Mrs. Collins stopped by again, carrying her pie dish. She smiled as always, but her tone was hesitant. "Nora, your daughter-in-law is such a sweet woman, but yesterday she walked right past me and didn't even say hello." I frowned. "Are you sure it was her?" She nodded quickly. Of course. I was standing right outside my gate. She looked straight at me, but her eyes, they felt cold, empty, like she didn't recognize me. I tried to keep my voice calm. Maybe she was distracted. Mrs. Collins sighed. Maybe, but she didn't have her usual smile. You know, the one that could light up a room. I forced a small laugh. Perhaps she wasn't feeling well. But her words echoed through me long after she left. When I went back inside, Clara was standing by the counter, cutting fruit for Matthew. She looked up and smiled. Everything okay? Yes, I said slowly. Mrs. Collins was just here. Oh, she's lovely, Clara said. We talked yesterday. My heart skipped. You did? Yes. She asked about the pie dish. Her tone was casual, her smile flawless. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but something deep inside me twisted. If Mrs. Collins was right, and I knew she was, then Clara hadn't recognized her at all. After lunch, I sat alone in the kitchen. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than ever. I opened my notebook again, the pages now full of uneven lines and restless ink. Neighbor noticed change, I wrote, not imagination. The words blurred slightly as my hand trembled. It was no longer just me noticing. The world around me was beginning to confirm it. That evening, Nathan called. Mom, I checked something, he said. The flight logs from last week. Clara's name appears twice, one for New York, one for a connecting route to Paris, both first class. I held the phone tighter. Who paid for them? The company name says Thompson Holdings. The name meant nothing to me, but the sound of it chilled my blood. That afternoon, I told Clara we were out of flour. I'll go, Mom, she said quickly, reaching for her purse. You've been on your feet all morning. Rest. She smiled, that same careful, polite smile, and walked out the door. A few minutes later, I followed her. I didn't even grab my coat. The air outside was warm, but I felt cold inside. From a distance, I saw her walking down the main street, her wicker basket on her left arm, her steps calm and light. I stayed far enough behind not to be noticed. She turned the corner near the grocery store, but instead of going in, she crossed the street and slipped into a narrow side alley I'd never seen her take before. My heart picked up its pace. I hesitated, then followed. The alley was quiet, lined with closed wooden doors and peeling paint. Clara stopped at one of them, knocked twice, and waited. A moment later, the door opened. Someone inside let her in. I stood behind a delivery truck, holding my breath. 5 minutes passed. Then the door creaked open again. Clara stepped out, holding the same basket. But something about her had changed. Her blouse looked freshly ironed, her hair perfectly combed, her lipstick slightly darker. She glanced around once, calm and unhurried, before walking away. I stayed hidden until she turned the corner back toward the market. When I finally followed, she was already inside the grocery store, standing by the flour shelf like nothing had happened. I pretended to browse nearby, watching her pay at the counter. She chatted easily with the cashier, smiled at an old lady behind her, and walked out like an ordinary woman running errands. By the time I returned home, she was already in the kitchen, humming that same tune while unpacking groceries. That was quick, I said, forcing a smile. The line was short today, she replied smoothly, her eyes meeting mine. Then she looked down at the counter and asked, Everything all right? Of course, I said softly. Everything's fine. When she turned away, I slipped into the dining room and opened my notebook. My handwriting shook, but the words were clear. Left at 3:00 p.m., returned 3:25, impossible distance. The next morning, I couldn't stay still. I needed to know what was behind that door. Clara had gone out with Stephen to drop Matthew at school, and I knew I had maybe an hour before she came back. I wrapped my shawl around me and walked down the same narrow alley. The morning air was thick with the smell of damp wood and dust. Everything looked quiet, lifeless. I reached the faded wooden door and stopped a few steps away, pretending to check my phone. Just then, the door opened. A woman stepped out, carrying a red basket. My heart stopped. She looked exactly like Clara. The same height, same soft curls, the same blue eyes. But her clothes were different, a gray sweater instead of the blue blouse Clara had worn, and her movements, slower, more careful, almost hesitant. She adjusted the strap of her basket, looked both ways, then walked down the alley. I stayed behind the corner, frozen. Every muscle in my body wanted to move, to speak, to ask who she was, but my voice wouldn't come out. When I finally turned the corner again, she was gone. Only the sound of a closing door echoed down the street. I walked home fast, my legs trembling. Every step felt unreal. How could two identical women exist in the same town, the same day, the same breath of time? When I reached my gate, I heard laughter from inside the house. I opened the door, and there she was, Clara, standing in the kitchen, her hair dry, wearing a pale yellow dress, arranging flowers like she hadn't left at all. "Good morning, Mom," she said cheerfully. My mouth went dry. "You're home early," she smiled. "Oh, I didn't go far, just the bakery." I forced a nod. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. She looked perfect, too perfect. Not a single sign of wind in her hair, not a wrinkle on her dress. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat in the dark living room with my notebook open on the table. The ticking clock sounded like a heartbeat in the silence. I wrote slowly, pressing the pen too hard against the paper. Two identical women, one in alley, one at home, same face. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. The silence in that house felt heavier than the truth. I needed someone who would listen without calling me crazy. I called Carol, my oldest friend. "Can we meet at the cafe near the corner?" I asked. Her voice was warm as always. "Of course, Nora. 10 minutes." I wrapped my shawl tight and walked quickly down the street. The bell above the cafe door jingled as I stepped inside. Carol was already there, her gray hair neatly tied, a cup of tea waiting for me. "You look pale," she said softly. "What's wrong?" I sat down and took a slow breath. "Carol, I think something's happening in my house." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I told her everything. Nathan's call, the passport, the alley, the second woman who looked exactly like Clara. Every word felt heavier coming out of my mouth, as if I were confessing a secret too big to say aloud. When I finished, she stayed silent for a long moment, her eyes never leaving mine. Then she said firmly, "You're not imagining this. Keep writing everything down. Dates, times, details, everything." I nodded. "I already started." "Good," she said. "If she's pretending, you'll need proof. And if she's dangerous, you'll need a plan." I hesitated. "You really believe me?" Carol reached across the table and took my hand. "I've known you 40 years. You've never lost your mind, not even when life tried to make you." Her words steadied me in a way nothing else had. I felt my pulse slow, my breath return. For the first time in days, I didn't feel alone. When we stood to leave, she looked at me seriously. "If she goes out again," she said, "follow her. Find out what's behind that door." I swallowed hard. "Follow her?" "Yes," she said quietly. "The truth won't come to you, Nora. You'll have to go find it." That weekend, Stephen left early for work, and Matthew was away on a school trip. The house was quiet except for the sound of birds outside. Clara walked into the kitchen, tying her hair back, her red basket in hand. "Mom, I'm going to the market," she said. I smiled faintly. "Don't forget the tomatoes." She nodded and left, closing the gate behind her. The moment she turned the corner, I grabbed my shawl and followed. Every step felt calculated, silent. She walked faster than usual, her basket swinging lightly. When she reached the main street, she crossed it and turned left, toward the same narrow alley. My heartbeat quickened. I stopped at the corner, hiding behind a parked car. Clara reached the same rusted gate as before and slipped inside. The door closed. For a few seconds, I stared at the empty alley, unsure what I'd do next. Then something caught my eye. A woman stepped out from another doorway farther down, carrying a blue basket instead of red. My breath caught in my throat. It was her. The same face, same posture, but the clothes were different. a white blouse, worn and faded, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She looked tired, uncertain, her shoulders slightly bent. She turned in my direction for a second, and I saw it. The same eyes, the same mole above the lip, the same face I'd looked at every morning in my kitchen. 2 women, 2 Claras. I ducked behind the car, afraid she'd see me. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. When I looked up again, the woman was already walking away from the alley. She disappeared into the crowd, moving slower, like she didn't know where to go. I waited another minute before heading home. My hands shook the whole way. When I reached the gate, I froze. The kitchen window was open, and inside, Clara was standing by the sink, washing vegetables. Her red basket sat neatly on the counter. She looked up and smiled. "You're out early, Mom." I nodded slowly. "Just needed some air." "Want me to make tea?" she asked. "No," I said softly. "I already had enough excitement for today." That night I opened my notebook and wrote with trembling hands, 2 women, 2 baskets, 2 lives crossing the same hour. And this time, the fear wasn't confusion anymore. It was certainty. When I got back from the alley, my legs felt weak. I stood by the gate for a long time before walking inside. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I stepped into the kitchen and froze. Clara was standing by the counter, slicing vegetables, her sleeves rolled neatly above her elbows. The same posture, the same calm rhythm I had just seen in that other woman minutes ago. She looked up and smiled. "You're back early," she said. "Yes," I replied carefully. "I just needed a walk." Her hair was perfectly dry, not a strand out of place. Her blouse looked freshly pressed, and her perfume filled the room with a heavy floral scent I hadn't noticed before. Something about it made my skin crawl. "New perfume?" I asked casually. She paused. "Oh, this? A sample from the store." I nodded, pretending to believe her. She turned back to the counter, chopping steadily, each slice precise and even. "Stephen said he might be late tonight," she added. I murmured something vague and moved toward the table, my mind racing. Every sound in the room felt too clear. The knife hitting the board, the faucet dripping, my pulse pounding in my ears. I glanced toward the basket on the counter. Red. The same one I had seen her carry earlier. But if she had gone into that alley and come back so quickly, how could she look this perfect now? Not a wrinkle, not a trace of dust. I wiped my palms on my skirt, trying to stay calm. She noticed and frowned. "You look pale. Are you okay?" "Just tired," I said. "Did you get everything at the market?" "Yes, the usual," she replied, her tone light. "Oh, and flour, of course." I forced a smile. "That's good." When she left the kitchen, I walked to the counter and touched the red basket, still warm from the sun. My hand trembled as I reached for my notebook. On a fresh page I wrote, 2:45 p.m., Clara seen entering alley, red basket. 3:10 p.m., Clara in kitchen, clean clothes, perfume different. I read the words twice, my breath shallow. The handwriting slanted from the pressure of my hand. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was evidence. I looked toward the stairs where her footsteps were fading. Something, or someone, was playing with us. And if I didn't act soon, I'd lose more than just my peace of mind. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I couldn't stop thinking about that alley and the woman who looked exactly like Clara. I needed answers, not theories. I left a note on the table saying I'd gone for groceries, then slipped out quietly. The streets were still half asleep, the air cool and gray. When I reached the alley, I saw the same rusted gate, the same cracked walls. My pulse quickened. A woman selling corn stood nearby. I showed her a family photo of Stephen, Clara, and Matthew. "Have you seen this woman?" I asked. She squinted at the picture, then nodded. "Oh, yes, she comes here often. She visits the house with the broken window, number 14. My throat tightened. I thanked her and walked toward the door. The paint was peeling, the steps uneven. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. The door creaked open. And there she was, the same face, the same eyes, but her clothes were plain, her hair slightly tangled. She looked scared. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I whispered, "Who are you?" Her voice trembled. "Please, don't tell her you found me." My knees went weak. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. The air between us felt heavy, thick with secrets. "Who?" I asked quietly. "Clara?" Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm her sister." The words hit me like a storm. Sister. The puzzle pieces shifted in my mind. Every strange smile, every left-handed gesture, every unexplained trip. I stepped inside, still clutching my purse. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated before whispering, "Isadora." She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Please come in," she said softly. The small house smelled faintly of disinfectant and something like wilted flowers. An old man lay coughing weakly on a cot in the corner, a thin blanket covering his legs. The room was bare, just 2 chairs, a table, and a flickering lamp that hummed quietly. I sat down, still trying to understand what I was seeing. The woman looked identical to Clara, but her face carried exhaustion, not arrogance. Her hands were rough, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. "I'm sorry," she said, avoiding my gaze. "My name is Isadora." I swallowed hard. "You look exactly like my daughter-in-law." "I know," she whispered. "She's my twin sister." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The word twin echoed in my head like a memory I never had. "She never told us," I said. "Why?" Isadora's shoulders shook. "Because she doesn't claim me anymore. She says I ruin her life just by existing." My heart ached. "She said that?" She nodded slowly. "I live here with my father. We don't have much. Clara visits sometimes, but only when she needs something." I frowned. "What does she need?" Isadora looked down at her hands, the skin cracked from work. "Sometimes she pays me to take her place," she said finally. "To pretend to be her when she's gone. To make sure no one notices she's missing." My pulse raced. "Take her place? In my house?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes. To pick up her son, to talk to you, to make it seem like she's there. She gives me her clothes, her perfume, everything. I do what she asks because my father's medicine is expensive." I felt dizzy. The chair beneath me creaked as I gripped its arms. "She's using you," I whispered. Isadora's voice broke. "I know, but I didn't know what else to do. I thought I was helping her. I thought maybe she loved me in her own way." I stared at the cracked floor, unable to speak. Every strange moment, every unexplained shift in Clara's behavior suddenly made sense. It wasn't madness. It was a system. A lie with a pulse. When I finally looked up, Isadora was crying silently, her tears falling onto her rough hands. I reached across the table and touched them. "You don't owe her silence anymore," I said quietly. She looked up, her lips trembling. "What are you going to do?" I answered, calm but certain. "I'm going to bring the truth home." Isadora wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, her voice trembling. "She said it was just for a few hours at first," she whispered. "She needed time to take care of business." I frowned. "Business?" She hesitated, then lowered her head. "A man, older, wealthy. She said he could give her everything she deserved." The room seemed to tighten around us. My breath grew shallow as Nathan's words echoed in my mind. "She's sitting next to a man in a gray suit." It all connected now. I leaned forward. "How long has this been happening?" "Months," Isadora said, her hands trembling. "She gives me money every time. Enough for rent, for medicine. I never asked questions." "Medicine," I repeated, glancing toward the old man on the cot. He coughed again, his chest rattling. Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted my father to live." I exhaled slowly, forcing calm into my voice. "I understand," I said. "You're a good person in a bad situation." Her lips quivered. "I never thought it would go this far. She said she just needed help pretending, but now she barely talks to me. She treats me like a stranger. The words cut deeper than I expected. In that moment, pity and anger twisted together inside me. Clara's selfishness had turned a sister's desperation into her disguise. I looked around the small house, the peeling paint, the broken window, the faint smell of medicine. Clara's luxury came from this woman's suffering. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft of a life. Isadora's voice broke the silence. "Please don't tell her I spoke to you. She'll be furious." I shook my head. "No, Isadora, she won't get that chance." I sat there in silence, letting the truth sink in. Isadora kept her gaze on the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. "She found me last year," she said. "I was selling flowers near the train station. She stopped and stared at me like she'd seen a ghost." I could picture it. Two identical women facing each other for the first time in years. One wearing silk, the other holding a basket of wilted roses. "She said she could help me," Isadora continued. "That I didn't have to struggle anymore. I believed her." I nodded slowly. "And what did she ask for in return?" "She told me I had to stay hidden, that no one could know she had a twin. She said it would ruin everything she'd built." I clenched my hands together. "And you agreed?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "At first, yes. I thought she was saving me. Then I realized she was saving herself." The old man coughed again from the corner, a painful sound that echoed through the tiny room. Isadora stood to pour him water, her hands shaking. "She'd bring me her clothes, jewelry, even her perfume," she said. "She told me exactly how to speak, how to smile, what to say if someone asked questions." I felt a cold wave spread through me. "And you did it? You came to my house?" "Yes," she whispered. "Sometimes just for an hour, sometimes for the whole day. She said it was harmless." I shook my head slowly. "She didn't just lie to her husband, she lied to her child, to all of us." Isadora covered her face, crying harder now. "I know. I'm sorry. I never wanted to deceive anyone." My voice softened. "You were desperate. She knew that. She used it." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of traffic outside drifted faintly through the cracked window. Finally, I asked, "Where does she go when you take her place?" Isadora hesitated, then whispered, "With him, the man in the gray suit. I think his name is Charles Thompson." The name felt heavy on my tongue. Stephen's wife. A double life. A secret man. The picture of the perfect family shattered in my mind like glass hitting the floor. I rose slowly from my chair. "Thank you, Isadora," I said quietly. "You've done the hardest thing already, telling the truth." She nodded weakly. "What will you do now?" I looked toward the door. "What I should have done from the start," I said. "Watch, listen, and bring this to light." Before leaving the alley, I turned back one last time. Isadora stood in the doorway, her face pale but calm. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You've given me what I needed." She nodded and closed the door slowly, as if sealing away a secret. I walked home, my steps unsteady, but my mind sharp. The truth wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was something I could touch. When I entered the house, Clara was already in the living room, reading a magazine like nothing had changed. She smiled. "You were out early." I forced a calm expression. "Just needed some fresh air." Her eyes flicked toward my bag. "Find what you were looking for?" "Yes," I said softly. "Exactly what I was looking for." That night, when everyone was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open and my phone beside me. I developed the photo I'd taken of Isadora and her father, printed it quietly, and glued it onto the next page. Underneath, I wrote in slow, deliberate strokes, "Her name is Isadora, sister, impersonator, victim. Charles Thompson, possible connection. Proof collected." I took pictures of every page, the dates, the handwriting, the ledger of lies. Then I emailed them to an old contact, Attorney Harold Adams, the family lawyer my husband had trusted for decades. When the files finished sending, I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. The evidence was now beyond reach, beyond destruction. Whatever happened next, the truth would survive. The next morning, I made tea as the first sunlight entered the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, I felt stillness, not fear. The kettle whistled softly, like a breath of relief. In the background, Clara's heels clicked across the hallway. "Mom, you're up early," she said lightly. I turned toward her with a calm smile. I had things to finish. She didn't ask what. She didn't need to. After she left, I added one final line beneath the photo. November 17th. Truth secured. Then I closed the notebook, pressing my palm against the cover, as if sealing it with intent. Outside, the world moved as if nothing had changed, but inside my walls, everything had. The game she played in shadows now belonged to daylight. The morning after sending the evidence, I stood by the window watching the sun rise over the garden. The air felt different, quieter, sharper, as if the house itself was waiting. I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew what I had to do. I picked up the phone and called Nathan. "Honey," I said softly, "I need you to come home this weekend." His voice grew alert. "Is something wrong?" "Yes," I replied, "but this time we'll face it together." When I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the kitchen glass. For weeks I'd been uncertain, doubting my own mind. Now, for the first time, I felt in control. Clara came downstairs a few minutes later, wearing a crisp white dress, humming lightly as she fixed breakfast. "Good morning, Mom," she said. "You're up early." "I have a lot to do," I answered, pouring myself a cup of coffee. She smiled. "You always do." Her calmness almost fooled me again. Almost. But now I could see every detail with new eyes. The way her hands trembled slightly when she stirred her tea. The faint hesitation before she spoke. The way she avoided my gaze. Guilt leaves shadows, no matter how well you hide them. I sipped my coffee slowly. "Stephen's coming home early tonight," I said. She froze for a moment, then forced a smile. "That's nice. I'll cook something special." "I already planned dinner," I replied. "Something simple, something honest." She looked at me oddly, but said nothing more. That afternoon, I went into my study and opened the drawer where my late husband's files were kept. The old trust documents, house deeds, and estate papers were still in perfect order. I placed a single sticky note on top of them. Review with Adams, Monday. It was time to make things official. Time to take back control of the legacy she had stained. That evening, I sat on the porch as the light faded, notebook in my lap. I turned to the last filled page and wrote in bold, careful lines. Truth known, lies exposed, justice pending. Then I closed it gently, tracing my fingers over the cover. For weeks that notebook had carried my fear. Now it carried my strength. I woke up earlier than usual. The house felt still, heavy with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I moved through each room slowly, straightening chairs, wiping the table, arranging plates that had already been cleaned. Everything had to be perfect tonight. Stephen came home from work earlier than expected. He loosened his tie and smiled faintly. "Dinner all ready, Mom?" "Yes," I said softly. "Tonight, we eat together. All of us." He raised an eyebrow. "All of us?" "Your brother's coming too," I replied. "I want one evening with my family under one roof." He nodded, though I saw confusion flicker in his eyes. When he went upstairs to shower, I turned to the kitchen. I seasoned the chicken the way Clara liked it, just as she always said she preferred. Lemon, rosemary, a bit of thyme. Every detail mattered. The meal had to feel ordinary, safe, familiar. As the smell of roasting filled the air, I set the table with the white cloth I usually saved for holidays. Then I lit 2 candles, one for truth, one for peace. Their small flames flickered gently, casting long shadows across the silverware. Clara entered, fixing her hair. "This looks beautiful, Mom," she said warmly. "Thank you," I answered, my tone even. "I thought we deserved something special." She smiled, unaware that the table she admired would soon become her witness stand. When the oven timer beeped, I checked the clock. 6:40 p.m., right on schedule. I walked to the front door and stood there waiting. A car engine hummed in the distance. A knock followed. I opened the door and saw Nathan standing there, serious and calm. He held an envelope in his hand. I whispered, "Did you bring it?" He nodded once. "Everything's inside. Flight records, passport copies, timestamps. It's all here." I took a deep breath and hid the envelope beneath a folded napkin on the sideboard. The evidence would speak when words failed. As I turned back toward the table, I looked at the flickering candles and thought of what my husband once told me. Truth doesn't need noise, Nora. It just needs a table and courage. I straightened my dress, took one last breath, and whispered to myself, "Tonight, the truth will finally sit with us." The smell of roasted chicken filled the house, warm and comforting. Stephen came down first, dressed neatly but with tired eyes. He smiled faintly at the table. "You really went all out tonight, Mom." "I wanted something peaceful," I said. "It's been a long few weeks." He nodded, pulling out a chair. A few moments later, Clara descended the stairs, wearing her soft blue dress and a practiced smile. "Everything smells amazing," she said sweetly. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone even. Her eyes flicked toward the tablecloth, the candles, the polished silver. "What's the occasion?" "Family," I said simply. She laughed lightly and sat beside Stephen. For a moment, the room looked like any other evening, Matthew's laughter echoing faintly from upstairs, the quiet clatter of plates, the small talk that covers deeper things. But inside me, every second was measured, every silence counted. I served the food slowly, careful with each motion. The candles flickered, reflecting in Clara's calm eyes. She looked utterly composed, too composed. Her confidence came from lies, but she didn't know those lies were already numbered. Stephen looked around, smiling. "It's nice, all of us together again." "Yes," I said softly. "It really is." Just then, a knock sounded at the door. Clara turned her head slightly. "Expecting someone?" I smiled faintly. "Yes." I rose from my chair, smoothing the tablecloth before walking toward the hallway. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. I opened the door. Nathan stood there, holding his coat in one hand, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood another woman, quiet, pale, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, then darted away. "Come in," I said softly. Nathan entered first, then guided the woman forward. Stephen looked up from the table, puzzled. Clara's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Mom," Stephen began, "what's going on?" I didn't answer. I simply walked to the end of the table and said, "Everyone please sit. We're not done yet." Clara's voice broke the silence. "Who is she?" I turned to her calmly. "Someone who's been part of this house far longer than you realize." The room froze. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Stephen's fork clinked softly against his plate, the only sound cutting through the silence. Matthew peeked from the hallway, confused by the tension in the air. Clara was the first to speak. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. Nathan stepped closer to the table, his tone calm but firm. "You should sit down." "I don't think so," she snapped. "Who is this woman?" I rose from my chair and walked around the table, placing a steady hand on the back of Stephen's chair. "Clara," I said evenly, "this is your sister." The color drained from her face. "That's insane. I don't have a sister." Isadora flinched at the words but didn't move. Stephen looked between them, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "They look identical," he murmured. Clara's voice cracked. "This is some kind of trick." Nathan reached into his coat pocket and placed an envelope on the table. Inside were several printed pages, passport logs, flight manifests, timestamps. "Your electronic passport," he said quietly. "Recorded departure, Paris. 3 weeks ago. You can't be here and there at the same time." Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the papers. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, her tone faltering. "It means everything," I replied. "You lied to all of us, to your husband, to your son, to me." Stephen's face went pale. "Clara, please tell me this isn't true." She backed away, shaking her head. "No, you don't understand. I had reasons." "Reasons?" I interrupted sharply. "To deceive everyone who trusted you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Isadora stood still, tears welling in her eyes, her body trembling under the weight of exposure. Matthew whispered softly from the doorway, "Why are there two moms?" No one answered him. Clara stared at me, her voice breaking. "You planned this." "Yes," I said quietly, "because the truth deserves witnesses." The candlelight flickered across her face, half in light, half in shadow, like the life she'd been living. And as she stood there speechless, her double in tears beside her, the room itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next lie to collapse. Stephen rose slowly from his chair, his face pale, his voice shaking. "Clara, please, just tell us the truth." She looked around the room, at me, at Nathan, at Isadora, like a trapped animal searching for a way out. Finally, she slammed her hands against the table. "Fine! You want the truth?" Her voice broke into a bitter laugh. "I'm tired. I'm tired of this small life, of pretending to be the perfect wife while everyone else gets to live." Her words cracked like glass. "Do you know what it's like to watch your husband work endless hours and come home too tired to notice you exist? I gave everything to this family, and what did I get? A house I don't even own and a life that feels like a prison." Stephen stared at her, disbelief written across his face. "That's not true," he said quietly. "You had everything. You had us." She shook her head violently. "No, Stephen. I had routine. I had duty, but never freedom." Nathan's tone was sharp, cutting through her self-pity. "Freedom? Is that what you call sneaking around with Charles Thompson?" Her eyes widened. The color drained from her cheeks. "How do you—" she began, then stopped, realizing too late that denial was useless. I spoke calmly. "He bought your flight tickets. He paid for your hotel. The same man who watched you betray your son's trust." Clara's breath came faster, her composure slipping. "Don't talk to me about trust," she shouted. "I've been living someone else's dream. You all think I should be grateful, that I should smile while drowning." Her voice echoed through the house. Matthew began crying quietly in the hallway, and Stephen turned away, his jaw tight with grief. Clara looked at him, desperate. "Stephen, I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to feel alive again." He didn't answer. He just sat down slowly, his hands covering his face. The silence that followed was thick with heartbreak. Clara's chest heaved, her eyes red, her mask finally broken. Every lie she'd built her life on was crumbling in front of her, and there was no one left to believe it. The silence was unbearable. Clara stood trembling, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Then a soft voice broke the air. "Clara, please stop." Everyone turned. Isadora stood near the doorway, her hands clasped tightly together, tears streaking down her cheeks. Her voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "You don't have to keep lying." Clara's head snapped toward her. "Stay out of this," she hissed. "You owe me your silence." Isadora flinched but didn't back down. "I never owed you lies," she said firmly. "You used me because I was poor, because you knew I couldn't say no." Clara's lip trembled. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Isadora interrupted, her voice breaking. "You wanted freedom, but you stole mine to get it." Stephen looked between them, stunned. "Two sisters," he whispered, "one destroying the other." Clara turned away, her hands covering her face. "You think I had it easy?" she said bitterly. "You think wearing nice clothes makes you happy? I was suffocating in this house." Her words came out more like a cry than an excuse. Isadora took a small step forward. Then you should have left honestly. You didn't have to drag me into your deception. Tears filled her eyes again. You made me part of your lies, Clara. But I'm done hiding. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. You're pathetic. You always were. Isadora shook her head. No, just human. The two women stood facing each other, mirror images split by choices. For the first time, Clara looked fragile, smaller than I'd ever seen her. Isadora, though trembling, stood straight. I felt a lump rise in my throat. It wasn't anger anymore. It was sorrow for what both had become. Stephen spoke softly, almost to himself. So much pain between two faces of the same blood. Isadora wiped her tears and said one last thing before turning away. I forgive you, Clara, but I'll never forget what your freedom cost me. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor. The room was trembling with silence, the kind that comes after every truth has been spoken. Clara kept her head down, her hands gripping the edge of the table like she needed it to stand. Isadora was still crying quietly near the doorway. I took a deep breath. Clara, I said calmly, when I welcomed you into this house, I called you my daughter. You had love, safety, and a family who trusted you. Her eyes flickered, but she said nothing. You didn't just betray Stephen, I continued. You betrayed the child who calls you Mom. You turned this home into a stage for your deception. Enough, she muttered. You don't understand what it's like to live like this. No, I said sharply. You don't understand what it means to live with honor. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and defiance. I did what I had to do. I shook my head slowly. No, you did what you wanted to do, and you hurt everyone who ever cared for you. The candles flickered between us, their small flames reflected in her eyes. For a moment, she looked like a stranger in her own skin. Do you think you can stand here and judge me? She snapped. Yes, I replied evenly, because I'm the one who still believes in what this family stands for. Stephen remained silent, his head bowed. Nathan stood behind him, tense, but still. Matthew peeked from the hallway again, confused and afraid. I turned to Clara one last time. You may leave this house tonight, I said, my voice steady. But remember this, truth always finds its way home. She stared at me, her breath shaking, eyes filled with something between hate and regret. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. The candles trembled as the wind followed her out. The door slammed shut. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then I reached forward and gently extinguished the candles. The smoke curled upward, carrying the last of her lies with it. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house like a final verdict. For a long moment, no one spoke. Stephen sat frozen, staring at the empty chair where Clara had been. Matthew's quiet sobs came from the hallway, small and frightened. I walked over and knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around his trembling shoulders. It's over, sweetheart, I whispered. You're safe now. He buried his face against me, his little hands clutching my sleeve. Behind us, the candles had burned low, their smoke curling like ghosts of what once was. Nathan gathered the papers from the table and placed them gently into a folder. He met my eyes and said softly, You did the right thing, Mom. I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. Justice never feels like victory when it's family. Stephen finally spoke, his voice low and hollow. I don't know how to explain this to Matthew. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't need to explain lies. Just show him truth. He covered his face with both hands, the weight of heartbreak pressing on him. When the house grew quiet again, I went to my study and opened the drawer that held the family documents. I pulled out the inheritance agreement and a pen. The paper felt cold beneath my fingers. I signed a new page, revoking Clara's rights to the estate, the house, and every shared asset tied to Stephen's name. When I finished, I placed the signed letter in an envelope and sealed it with a single motion. It wasn't revenge. It was balance restored. Back in the dining room, I blew out the remaining candles. A faint trail of smoke rose, twisting gently before disappearing. The room smelled of wax and silence. Stephen stood in the doorway, his eyes red. "What happens now?" "Now," I said quietly, "we begin again." He nodded slowly, the first spark of relief flickering across his face. A week passed before the house began to feel like a home again. The tension that once clung to every wall had faded into quiet peace. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, touching the furniture that had witnessed too many lies. Stephen spent more time with Matthew now. I'd watch from the porch as they repaired the old garden fence together, their laughter breaking through what used to be silence. For the first time, Matthew smiled without hesitation. One morning, Isadora arrived with a small basket of flowers. She stood uncertainly at the gate, her hands trembling. I opened the door and said softly, "Come in, you're family now." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve that, Mrs. Langford." I smiled gently, "Then earn it by helping us rebuild." From that day, she stayed, quiet, humble, and grateful. She helped Stephen cook, read bedtime stories to Matthew, and tended the roses Clara had ignored for months. There was a gentleness in her that reminded me what truth could sound like when spoken without fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch sipping tea while Isadora watered the plants. Stephen joined me, his voice soft. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I said. "Just live honestly. That's thanks enough." He smiled faintly, watching Matthew chase a butterfly across the yard. The air smelled of soil and fresh beginnings. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the next lie, the next shock, the next betrayal. The past had burned itself out. What remained was light, simple, quiet, and real. As I looked at Isadora kneeling in the garden, her hands covered in earth and forgiveness, I thought of all the broken things that could still bloom again, and I realized that sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about planting something honest where deceit once grew. The days that followed were calm in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. No shouting, no secrets, just the soft rhythm of ordinary life. The mornings began with the scent of coffee instead of tension, and for the first time in months, the house no longer felt haunted. Stephen and Isadora fell into an easy routine, unspoken but genuine. He fixed the garden fence while she planted new flowers in the soil nearby. Sometimes I'd catch them exchanging quiet smiles, fragile, cautious, but real. Matthew loved helping them, his small hands dirty from pulling weeds he proudly called bad guys. At night, the house filled with small, beautiful sounds, plates clinking, pages turning, laughter echoing faintly from the living room. Peace had returned not as a miracle, but as a choice we made every day. I often watched Isadora move around the kitchen, careful and graceful, as if afraid to take up too much space. One evening I said, "You don't have to walk on eggshells here." She smiled shyly. "It just feels strange, being allowed to stay." "You earned your place by telling the truth," I replied. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "I just hope it's enough." It was, more than enough. Later, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, the same place where Clara's lies had once poisoned the air. Now it smelled of cinnamon and tea. The framed photos on the wall looked different too, not because they'd changed, but because we had. I added a new one that evening, Stephen, Isadora, and Matthew standing together under the magnolia tree. Their smiles were hesitant, imperfect, but honest. That was all I needed. As I turned off the lights and looked around one last time, I realized something simple yet profound. Peace doesn't arrive with silence. It's built from the noise we choose to end. And in this house, that choice had finally been made. A week later, the mail arrived as it always did, a soft thud on the front porch. Among the bills and circulars lay one plain white envelope, no return address. The handwriting on it stopped me cold. It was hers. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, the words written in Clara's delicate, familiar script. "I'm sorry." The letter began with those two words, small but heavy. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope that one day Matthew will understand that I loved him, even when I lost my way. I was selfish, blinded by things that never mattered. Please tell him his mother wasn't all lies, just a woman who forgot who she was. My hands trembled slightly as I read. The ink was smudged in places, as if her tears had fallen on the paper. At the bottom, she'd drawn a small heart, on the left side of the page, not the right. Even her regret had switched hands. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the moment pressing on me. Anger, sadness, pity, they all blurred together until only one feeling remained. Relief. Because at least now she had chosen truth, however late it came. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my notebook, right beside the final entry that had ended her story. Then I whispered softly, "At least now she remembers which hand she used to love with." Through the open window, a breeze stirred the curtains, carrying away the smell of ink and paper. Outside, the roses rustled gently in the sunlight, the same roses she once planted, now blooming again without her. Spring came softly that year, almost shy after the storms that had passed. The magnolia tree in the yard bloomed again, its pale petals drifting through the air like quiet forgiveness. For the first time in months, the house looked alive, not perfect, not untouched, but real. Stephen spent his weekends repainting the living room, the same color it used to be when he was a boy. Isadora helped, her hands steady now, her laughter soft but genuine. Sometimes I'd hear them singing along to old songs from the radio, their voices overlapping like two lives slowly mending. Matthew loved the change most of all. He helped plant new flowers by the fence, tiny hands patting the soil as if sealing a promise. "Grandma," he asked one morning, "are these going to stay forever?" I smiled and brushed a bit of dirt from his cheek. "Nothing stays forever, sweetheart, but beauty always returns if you take care of it." He nodded seriously, the way only a child can, and went back to planting. Inside, the house smelled of fresh paint and bread from the oven. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching them, the new rhythm of a family rebuilt on truth. There was no pretending anymore, no hiding behind masks. Just honesty, fragile but steady, like a heartbeat learning to trust again. That night, when the work was done, we sat together at the table. No speeches, no grand declarations, just simple peace. Stephen raised his glass slightly. "To new beginnings," he said. I nodded, my eyes warm. To the ones who stayed. Outside, the evening light glowed against the window, painting the walls in gold. The cracks from the past were still there, but now they looked like part of the design. Reminders that even broken things can hold light. It happened on a quiet afternoon. The air was warm, the house peaceful, the hum of life steady again. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. The old landline, its sound cutting clean through the calm. I picked it up without thinking. Langford residence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a familiar voice said softly, "Hello, Nora." I froze. Even after everything, I recognized her tone instantly. Clara. She sounded distant, subdued, the sharpness gone, replaced by something brittle. "I know I shouldn't call," she said, "but I needed to hear your voice once more." I took a slow breath. "Where are you?" "In a place that helps people remember who they are," she said. "The doctors call it treatment. I call it starting over." Her voice wavered, but there was no deceit in it this time. "I got your letter," I said quietly. "I read every word." "I meant them," she whispered. "All of them." The line went silent for a few seconds, just the faint hum of distance between us. Finally, she asked, "How is Matthew?" "He's growing," I said. "He's learning what honesty looks like." A shaky laugh escaped her. "Then maybe he'll learn faster than I did." I didn't reply. Some silences didn't need to be filled. "I won't bother you again," she said softly. "I just wanted you to know." I'm trying to be better, even if it's too late. My throat tightened, but my words stayed calm. It's never too late to stop lying. Goodbye, Nora, she said. Goodbye, Clara. The line clicked, leaving only the quiet buzz of disconnection. I stood there for a moment, then placed the receiver back on its cradle. Outside, the magnolia petals fluttered past the window, white against the sunlight, falling but beautiful. Some endings don't shout, they just exhale. That weekend, Stephen suggested we take a new family photograph. It had been years since we'd stood together for one, years since faces were honest, smiles unforced. The idea felt both fragile and brave, but I agreed. The morning light was soft, the air calm. We gathered in the garden under the magnolia tree, its blossoms scattered like snow on the grass. Matthew ran ahead, laughing as Isadora tried to fix his collar. Stephen set up the tripod, his hands steady now, steadier than I'd seen them in months. "Ready, Mom?" he asked. I nodded, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress. Isadora stood on my left, Matthew between us, holding my hand. For a brief moment, everything aligned, like the world itself paused to witness what we had rebuilt. As the camera clicked, I felt a strange warmth rise inside me. Not pride, not relief, something deeper. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that truth had cost us dearly, but it had given us back something worth far more. When the photo printed later that day, we gathered around to look at it. 3 generations, imperfect but together. There were scars in our eyes, yes, but there was also peace. I placed the photograph into a wooden frame and set it on the mantel, beside one of Henry and me from decades ago. 2 pictures, side by side, past and present, both earned. Matthew tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, can we take another one next year?" I smiled, brushing his hair back. "Of course, as long as we keep telling the truth." He grinned proudly. "I promise." That simple promise, from a child who had seen too much, felt like the final repair this family needed. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The soft hum of the clock filled the silence, each tick marking a chapter that had finally ended. On the table before me lay the old leather-bound notebook, the one that had carried every lie, every clue, every truth I'd written down. Its pages were worn, edges curled, ink faded in some places where my hand had trembled. I ran my fingers over the cover, remembering how it had begun. Fear, confusion, anger. And now, all that remained was peace. I opened it one last time. The first page still bore the line I'd written weeks ago. Something doesn't add up. I smiled faintly. Now, everything did. As I turned through the pages, I saw every stage of our storm. The discovery, the investigation, the confrontation, and the calm after. Each page was a map of what we had survived. When I reached the end, I added one final entry, my handwriting steady and sure. Truth delivered, family restored, justice served. Then I dated it and closed the cover slowly, pressing my hand over it as if sealing it for good. The weight of the notebook felt lighter now, not because the pages were empty, but because the burden inside me was gone. I placed it in the drawer beside Henry's old watch and whispered, "It's done." The lamp beside me flickered once, casting soft golden light across the walls. Outside, the night wind moved gently through the magnolia tree, its leaves rustling like a lullaby. For months, that notebook had been my shield. Now, it was my reminder that strength doesn't come from anger, but from clarity. I turned off the lamp, letting the room fall into a peaceful dark. The past was written, closed, and stored where it belonged. Morning came softly, wrapped in golden light that spilled through the curtains. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of magnolia blossoms drifting from the garden. For the first time in what felt like years, I woke without the weight of unfinished thoughts. I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the porch, the wooden steps warm beneath my feet. The world was quiet, except for the song of birds and the distant hum of the town beginning its day. Stephen was already in the garden with Matthew, helping him build a small wooden birdhouse. Isadora knelt nearby, tying back the vines that had begun to climb the fence. "Grandma," Matthew called, waving a tiny hammer, "we're making a home for the bluebirds." I smiled. "Make sure it's strong enough for them to stay." He nodded with determination, and Stephen laughed softly beside him. Watching them, I felt something shift inside me. Not just peace, but renewal. The same ground that once held lies now held roots, laughter, and light. Isadora looked up from her work and smiled shyly. "Coffee smells wonderful." I handed her a cup. "You've earned it." She took it with both hands, her eyes glistening with quiet gratitude. We stood there for a while, saying nothing, just breathing in the morning air. Every sound, the birds, the rustling leaves, the soft clatter of tools, felt like proof that life had decided to move forward. I thought of Clara, somewhere far away, learning to face her truth. Maybe one day she'd stand under the same kind of light and understand what it meant to rebuild. The sun rose higher, brushing warmth across my face. The shadows that once lived inside this home were gone, replaced by something gentler, steadier. As the sun climbed higher that morning, I sat on the porch and watched my family move through the garden, quiet, alive, and whole again. The world looked simple now, stripped of secrets. No masks, no hidden games, just truth, breathing freely in every corner of the house. I took a slow sip of coffee and let my thoughts drift. Everything that had once felt unbearable had turned into something solid, lessons written in the ink of survival. I had learned that justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes in silence, in small choices, in the courage to look someone in the eye and say, "No more lies." The birds sang above the magnolia tree, their voices light and effortless. I remembered the night I thought my world was falling apart, the moment Nathan called, the shock in his voice, the footsteps behind me. That was where it all began. And this peace, this morning, this light, was where it ended. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. Truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. And once you face them, the world stops spinning so wildly. It finds its rhythm again. I stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the garden. Matthew was holding a tiny birdhouse, showing it proudly to Stephen and Isadora. Their laughter carried through the air, clear, bright, real. I smiled, whispering softly to myself, "That's what justice sounds like." Then I looked up at the sky, endless, clean, forgiving. The storm was long gone, but its rain had made everything bloom. So I did what I always did when a chapter truly ended. I whispered a thank you to the silence and let it answer back in peace.